We are going to talk about ISO 9001 2015 standard planning. This is the first part of PDCA cycle. ISO 9001 standard has got a very logical structure. It starts with scope, the scope of the standard itself. ISO 9001 is a standard for quality management system. Clause number 2, normative reference. If any other standard becomes integral to ISO 9001, that will be reflected in normative reference. ISO 9000, which is the terms and definitions and vocabulary, is referenced in 9001 as a normative reference. This means the requirement of 9000, which is the terms and definitions, the quality management principles, all of them become part of 9001 standard. That's what it really means. Normative reference is the space reserved for integrating other standards. Some standards may not have normative reference. For example, ISO 14001. ISO 45001 does not have a normative reference. So the space will remain blank, but the 10-element structure will remain intact, which is easy and very convenient for reference. Clause number 3 is terms and definitions. All terms and definitions are addressed in clause number 3. But here in ISO 9001, 9000, which is the normative reference in clause number 2, includes terms and definitions. So there is no separate terms and definitions given in clause number 3, where it refers, that cross-refers, that refer ISO 9000 reference in normative reference. Where there will be no normative reference, for example, 14,000, 45,000 and other standards, all terms and definitions will come in clause number 3. Then requirement starts from context of the organization, which is why this organization is established, what purpose it is going to serve, its external and internal issues, scope, processes, all those things, determination of the needs and expectations of the interested parties, relevant interested parties. Those are the starting point for quality management system that will define the rest of it, which then is taken over by top management, which is the leadership clause number 5, where the standard talks about what is the roles and responsibility of the top management, creating a customer-focused organization, defining roles and responsibilities, and all those things which are related to top management. Now, top management is required to plan, to establish management system and run their business, which is the point we're talking about now, clause number 6. Clause number 6 is planning. Let us see what ISO 9001 requires. Let me open the slide so that I don't miss out anything, and we'll talk about planning part. Planning. Now, planning includes first risks and opportunities. Now, what is risk? Effect of uncertainties, which is unknown unknown or known unknowns. Something that we do not know, which can impact quality management system, which can influence the way organization is managed. They're the risk, unforeseeable, unforeseen event that can threaten the quality management system and achievements of its results. So risk is effect of uncertainty. Opportunities is what you can do for improving a management system. You have to see opportunities as well. Then talks about quality management system objectives and planning to achieve. Now, clause number 6.2 talks about objectives. Now, the policy is the high-level thought of the organization. You cannot measure the policy truly. So the objectives will have to be established which is descending from the policy, which is actually coming from the policies. So objectives are the milestones, the results that you are going to achieve over a period of time. And with that, you can measure whether the policies and the processes and the management system is yielding desired results. It is like whether you are achieving the milestone, the results. These are objectives. What kind of objectives are qualified to be quality objectives? For example, we'll reduce repair and rejection by 90% from the current level, and that's an objective. The ISO standard requires those objectives must be aligned with the strategic direction of the organization. This means the business direction of the organization. Many years ago, I was attending a certification ceremony. The organization was sharing their experience, and there was a point of time their castings were unpredictable. After final machining, you might find that there is a void and the whole casting is rejected. Sometimes the chemistry does not meet the requirement. So all those problems were causing a significant amount of rejection, more than 30 to 40% rejections, which is a huge amount of loss for material, time, and cost. Well, they have to melt them again, but there's a huge amount of time and cost impact. That is when spectroanalyzer was introduced. Now, the spectroanalyzer, when the steel is still in molten state, you can take a sample, polish it within few minutes. You can know what is the composition exactly of the ladle going to come when it is cast. Now, if you find carbon is more or less, or manganese is more or less, or silicon is more or less, you can immediately balance with the raw material, which is steel. The ladle is still in molten state and waiting for pouring. So the moment you know this and you know the purity level of ferromanganese, ferrosilicon, etc., you can calculate how much will have to be added. And once you add this and then take a small sample once again and test it's perfect, now the chemistry is going to be 100% acceptable. So the spectroanalyzer, which was a revolutionary development at that point of time, and a testing by this chemical analysis by spectroanalysis, which is an instant reading it gives, which is very extensively used in laboratories today, eliminated the rejection of castings for faulty chemical composition were completely eliminated. They also introduced a software where you can have the cross section of the casting and you know where the hot spots are, where the cracks are likely to happen. And that is where they were designing the risers. So once this is done, and the design of the casting was also modified so that there is no air gets trapped while pouring, the entire possibility of casting voids were eliminated, hot spots were eliminated. So almost 95 to 97% problems were eliminated by introducing this software and spectroanalyzer. Now imagine the impact on the overall productivity, profitability, customer delivery, on-time delivery. So they have taken on objectives, reduce rejection almost 100% with technology. Now, if there was no plan how they will reduce, this will never see the reality of the day. Therefore, they've taken, the plan was introduce a spectroanalyzer, introduce testing machine, introduce the software, and by doing this, they have identified who will do what, when this will be done, how the results will be monitored, how the results will be even measured. And with this introduction, they've achieved their objectives They were saying that their costings were almost 100% meeting the requirement after introduction of this. Just imagine from 30 to 40% rejection at time has become zero in terms of volume for a company making thousands and thousands of bulbs. What will be the impact on their profitability? And this is how quality objectives can be linked with the strategic direction of the organization. And also, clause number 6.3 talks about planning for changes. If there is a process changed for something better, even for something better, it needs to be considered the impact of this change, how the system will really work. For example, when an organization introduces ERP solution, for example, where manual process will now move to an ERP solution, whether the system is now working well is something that has to be verified. Here, this very example that you have given, planning of changes, how the costing will be made, how the process of costing will really work, how the material will be tested, the whole thing was changed. And the processes were introduced or refined or fine-tuned and implemented, the results were checked. And once it is validated, that means the changes are producing desired results. So, in planning, you need risks and opportunities. Opportunity means what way you can improve. What are the opportunities opening up where organization can reap some newer benefits? So not only risks, risk might make an organization timid. Opportunities will make them optimistic. Now, risk-based thinking is not negative. It is a proactive thing because you are not surprised by something has happened. You have assessed the risks in advance. As an auditor, we see whether there is a process of risk identification and risk assessment, and whether they are also looking at the opportunities and how they bring those risks under control. What are the control measures? ASO is all about risk management process. This reflection you will find everywhere, in fact. When we're talking about evaluation of supplier, it is a risk reduction process because suppliers providing the material is bringing some risks. Contractors, when they come and an organization outsources something to supplier or a contractor, they are bringing new risks. When a product is newly designed, there is risk. Risk could be because of if some inputs are not taken, the competence of the designer, whether the intended results will be achieved. So by doing review, by doing verification, by doing validation, those risks are controlled. So ISO talks about the risk-based thinking, and that's where it starts with. Let me show you a sample risk assessment, how this can work. In this table, risk type, we have identified. The organization may have different processes. I'm just trying to explain how typically this can be done. One thing you have to remember, ISO 9000 standard does not require quantitative risk assessment. Sometimes risk cannot be quantified. So it's not the intent of the standard that all risk has to be quantified and has to be given a numerical value. That's not a requirement. But risk assessment is mandatory. Whatever way they feel is suitable for them, they can adopt. So this is a process I'm showing here. Risk type, then identified risk, the detection method. How did you determine this risk? And what is the likelihood of this occurrence? And if this happens, what kind of severity you can expect? And multiplying likelihood with the severity will give you the risk rating. You might find this very high risk, low risk, moderate risk. For example, placing an order to a supplier in a different country where the organization has never dealt before. can be an unacceptable risk. So how these are done? Maybe a review, maybe verification, maybe a visit, maybe introduction of buyer's own inspection, intervention points and certain stages to make sure the products will meet the requirements. So these are risk control measures. Once this is done, the risk will come down because you now know, the organization knows the supplier and their credibility, so the risk can come down. So the controls, as I said, based on the risk, you can have identified controls. And these can be implemented based on a program. This program could be how soon you can do, maybe within a month, within 2 months, or immediate from each job or stuff like that. And then you identify remnant risk and who is responsible and accountable. Now, if I take one sample here, so delivery of non-conforming pipes is a risk. Now, identified risk is delivery of non-conforming product due to ambiguous requirement. There are different types of risk we have identified. Delivery of non-conforming product due to missed stage inspections. Delivery of non-conforming product due to faulty NDT equipment. So we have identified different types of problems just for the example to explain you. And from each one, how do we determine this risk and what is the likelihood and what is the severity? And that will give you 1 into 4 is 4. That's the risk rating. And these are the controls identified. And within 2 months' time or 2 weeks' time, whatever time that you decide here, you implement them and bring this risk to an acceptable level. Now, remnant risk is 1 because this 4 has now reduced to 1 by introducing those controls. So if this comes to an acceptable level, QA/QC manager is possibly responsible and accountable. Like that, the risks are identified, assessed, and if possible, some kind of quantification. If possible, they can do it. Could be qualitative method. It's very high risk, low risk, moderate risk. You don't have to give this numerical rating. They simply can say it's a high risk and we should do these kind of controls. That is also acceptable. So this risk rating of likelihood and severity is not mandatory, but it can be one of the method. Then once risk comes to this level, you cannot bring down all risk to 0. It's not possible. And this is the level of risk you are willing to operate. And you control this if there is any other new risk is coming. So risk assessment is not one-time static process. It is an iterative process. You have to continuously do that. And as an auditor, we check how they've identified the risk and how they introduced controls and whether the controls have been implemented and other controls bringing the unacceptable risk to an acceptable level. And you talk to the responsible person, understand the process, and that's how we are going to do the audit. Now, organization can manage risk-based thinking to prioritize, balance the risk and opportunities, analyze the priorities, what is acceptable, what is unacceptable, plan action to address the risk, how to avoid, eliminate, and mitigate risks. I've already talked about, and implement the plan to take action. You have mentioned that within a month time, within 2 months time, within 1 week or whatever is the timeline. And they check the effectiveness of the actions taken. Does it work? And learn from the experience and improve. And that's how risk is managed. As I mentioned, ISO 9001 standard does not require a formal quantification of risk or formal risk management process, but it does require you have to assess risk, and for 31,000 ISO can be used as a principle of guideline for assessing the risk of the organization. It's a very, very good guideline standard. But this is not mandatory. If this was mandatory, that would have been reflected in normative reference in clause number 2. And then Planning. So, as I mentioned, without a plan, objectives will not be achieved. It will remain a dream. So, the quality objectives will have to be consistent with the quality policy. They have to derive, they have to come down, descend from the quality policy. So, policy is the overall direction for the organization set by the top management with regard to quality. So, the objective will have to be descending from the policy and be consistent with the quality policy, and objectives shall be measurable. So, if you say, I will improve the quality significantly, you can't really make this process verifiable because you do not have a baseline to measure whether really you have improved or not. But if you say, I will reduce the delivery time from 7 days to 2 days, you can measure. And within next 2 months' time, that could be a very wonderful example for a courier service company that we were delivering a shipment from India to Germany in 7 days earlier. Now the new improved process will ensure it can be delivered in 2 or 3 days' time. And these will be implemented in 7 days, 7 months, or 3 months, or 2 months' time. How? Maybe they will have an exclusive arrangement with an airlines. They will have an improved delivery network, collection at the home country of the sender, and on the receiver country a delivery network. So those are the planning process to achieve the objectives. And that should be measurable as far as practicable and take into account the applicable requirement. Whatever applicable requirements are there, it could be customer requirement, it could be statutory requirement that will have to be also considered. Be relevant to conformity of products and services and to enhance customer satisfaction. As I mentioned, customer satisfaction is ultimate goal of an organization. If the customers are happy and delighted, they will continuously place orders. And that's the essence of continuity. That's how an organization continues. You cannot imagine an organization with a customer continuously relying on them, be it any type of organization, manufacturing, contracting, service industry, training providers like us. We need to ensure our customers, our students are delighted. You are delighted. And that's how the organization's quality management system has to be designed. For example, I can decide I will enhance our customer satisfaction index from 4.8 to 4.9. This improvement would be a very significant improvement. And that is how organization has to have the objectives and plan the objectives and make them measurable. And these objectives will have to be related to the customer satisfaction. Ultimately, if the customer is happy, business continues. So the objectives shall be monitored and communicated and updated as appropriate, and objectives shall be maintained as documented information. I need to know these are my objectives and this is my plan. And those records or those informations, so quality objectives shall be maintained as documented information. So they'll have to be available in some form. This is the requirement. Planning how to achieve quality objectives. This is how, what will be done. You need to know what will be done. What resources will be required. Who will be responsible to do that? Also, when this will be implemented and completed. How the results will be evaluated. And this is how the plan will be prepared. And those plans to be implemented to make sure the objectives are achieved. One thing I have to tell you here, organization needs to have objectives, quality objectives, and plan to achieve those objectives. It is possible due to certain circumstances, objectives were not achieved. Situation changed, context changed, new risk has surfaced, due to which the organization did not achieve their objectives. This itself is not a non-conformity. But if the organization does not look at what went wrong why they have not achieved the organization, how they tweak and fine tune their plan, then the system collapses. Then there is a non-conformity. So simply not achieving an objective is not a non-conformity, but not looking at why they have not achieved and what they should be doing is a non-conformity. Now, let us talk about planning of changes. Now, when we are talking about planning for changes, the changes shall be carried out in a planned manner. The organization shall consider purpose of the changes, why these changes are being made, and what is the potential consequence. An integrity of quality management system, I did mention, when system changes from one process to another, the transition shall have to be smooth so there is no disruption, and there must be availability of resources to ensure the changes are implemented, allocation of resources, responsibility and authority, and this is how an organization can effectively implement changes in management system. So again, in summary, the organization needs to look at risks and opportunities, establish quality objectives, and plan to achieve objectives, and also making sure there is a good plan to make changes in the system with continuity without any disruption. That's how the whole process has to be audited. I hope I could give you some insight. Thank you.